Welcome back to 10,000 Steps with Baby. Thanks very much for joining me today. I am just super happy right now this week, and I'm happy despite the fact that my 4-month-old is battling hard through a sleep regression at the moment, and my 3-year-old has gone completely insane these last few weeks for reasons unknown. But I am happy because despite all this, I can now face these things with dairy back in my life. So that means I'm back eating pizza and chocolate and croissants and ice cream, and my life is 1,000% better because of this. So I thought I would just talk a bit about all the things that have been going on with that recently. And the story behind all of this was that when Alba was about 6 weeks old, she suddenly developed eczema all over her body. And it was particularly severe in areas that, due to her fat folds and being a squishy new baby, didn't get much air. So much so that one weekend we had to take her to the out of hours GP on a Saturday because her neck had just turned into this mess of broken skin, and it just looked awful despite our best efforts of trying to get on top of it with creams and drying it out. So we managed to get on top of that eventually, but we were still moisturizing her whole body twice a day, and we cut down on baths and we stopped her swimming lessons, but her skin was just getting worse and worse. And this also timed up with her starting to get very unsettled at night. And of course, it's really difficult to say because is that just baby sleep, or is that because her skin was annoying her, or the fact that she's actually always just been a very farty baby. I'm sorry if you're listening to this, Alba, when you're 18, but you are a super farty baby. So because of all this, I decided to cut out dairy from my diet in case this was cow's milk protein allergy, or CMPA, if you've ever heard of that. And the reason that I even had heard about this in the first place was because with my son, when we started weaning, he had an episode where he, within minutes of me feeding him some sweet potato, he started sneezing, rubbing his eyes, and he came out in hives all over his body. And even though the hives sort of disappeared over the course of the day, he then developed pretty bad eczema. And we got sent to have some blood tests because it wasn't clear what caused it. And the blood test showed that he had an IgE allergy to milk. I had added it to the sweet potato when I was pureeing it, and I had just assumed it was okay because he had had Greek yogurt a couple of times before this with no issue. So in my head, I just thought dairy was fine, and I think I'd actually even forgotten I'd added it to the sweet potato at the time. So when the blood results came back, I got a call from the nurse at the GP practice who said that as I was breastfeeding, I had to completely cut out all dairy from my diet. And James was obviously not allowed to eat it either. And a few months later, I got a call from a dietitian who got in touch, and she gave us some tips and then said that once James had turned 1, we could start doing the milk ladder, and hopefully he would then be able to tolerate dairy. And I think the stats that we got given for that was, I think 80% of children outgrow a milk allergy by the time they're 1, and then about 95% have outgrown it by the time they're 5. So I went completely dairy free for 2 or 3 months. And then by chance, one of my good friends is training to be a GP. She had had a teaching session from a pediatric allergy specialist, as this is a common problem for GPs. And she sent me the information that they had been given. And she said, I'm not sure you've been given the right advice here, because James never had any problems while he was being exclusively breastfed. All the issues started after weaning and when he'd been ingesting the dairy directly into his stomach. So that was some amazing advice from her. And I will be forever grateful to her for sharing that with me, because it meant that I could get back to enjoying having my regular coffees, eat out without just having to have the vegan option or plain chips, and of course, starting all my favourites like ice cream and chocolate again. But of course, although I could go back to eating dairy, we still had to wean James dairy free until after he had completed the milk ladder. And I'm part of a Facebook group for people with CMPA, cow's milk protein allergy babies. And this is one of the commonest questions that gets posted about how to go about weaning whilst avoiding dairy. So I thought I would share my experience of it. And to be honest, I think it's one of those things that actually sounds a lot worse than it actually is once you get your head around it. So we did a mix of purees and baby led weaning. So I would mash up some avocado and then I would give him a stick of it to practice picking up and chewing. And initially, we just did that with lots of different fruit and veg. And then I gave other single foods like egg fingers cooked with oil, toast fingers with dairy free butter, salmon, porridge, Weetabix with oat milk, etc. And we did all the common allergen foods for 3 days in a row before mixing them with anything else so that we could watch for any other reactions. So there's things like soy, wheat, egg, uh, nuts. There's a few more. I think there's 8 or 9 main allergen groups, and they recommend you do those for 3 days before you can say that you're not going to have a reaction. And then probably by the time he was about 8 months, he tried enough individual things that I could make him pasta with a vegetable sauce cooked with lots of olive oil for fat. And so he was eating proper meals. And he could then have a variation of whatever we were having for dinner or lunch. And I would just modify the dairy. So we would have spaghetti bolognese, and I would just put some dairy free cheese on his portion, or sausage, mash, and broccoli. And I would use dairy free butter and oat milk in the mashed potatoes. He absolutely loved coconut yogurt, and he would have that as a pudding type thing if he was still hungry. Um, I was at times concerned that he wasn't getting enough fat in his diet because obviously one of the big sources of fat in all our diets is butter and milk and cheese and those sorts of things. So, but I would just try and add different types of fat. So I would cook food with lots of olive oil or add it in. And then things like avocado, got lots of healthy fats, peanut butter, oily fish. And of course, he was still breastfeeding, and they say food before 1 is just for fun. So I didn't overly worry about it, how much he was eating or how many calories he was getting, because he was still getting most of his calories from milk. And if you're starting weaning, the best thing I can recommend is to look at the Solid Starts website. This is what I looked at pretty much every single day. Is an amazing source of information. You can search almost any food really, and it will tell you about the vitamins it contains and its health benefits, but also how to serve it safely. And it'll do that depending on your baby's age. So um, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but it'll show you it being mashed, and then it can be cut up into small bits so baby can practice like pincer grip picking things up, and then you can serve it whole. So that was really useful. And then there's, of course, some amazing Instagram accounts out there. So there's What Mummy Makes, who I think also has a cookbook now, and they do a lot of baby recipes that like the family can eat too. So you're not just having to make a separate meal for them, which is of course takes up a lot of time and energy to do that. And yeah, there's loads of different Instagram accounts that does some very cool like recipe ideas about how to make baby friendly vegetable nuggets and quiche and things like that. And if that's your jam, there's loads out there. Personally, I just like being able to cook something that all of us could eat, like the spag ball, and I would just make sure that his mince was really mashed up when he was younger and things like that, because I couldn't really be bothered faffing around making different meals or these baby quiches or something, because you know how it is. Sometimes you'll spend an hour making something and the baby just wants absolutely nothing to do with it, or it just gets chucked on the floor, or so. Um, and if you're in the UK and you don't know where to start with dairy alternatives, then I have tried loads, and these are my top recommendations. So you don't have to waste your money on trying a bunch of stuff that's absolutely horrible. Cathedral City cheese is probably the only edible cheese out of all the ones I've tried. Um, some of them are just absolutely horrible. But Cathedral City, I mean, I wouldn't eat a cheese sandwich with it, if that makes sense, but I would happily put it on fajitas or pasta, and I wouldn't overly notice it wasn't normal cheddar. Oatly barista goes really well in coffee. It's nice and creamy. It doesn't go well in tea. Unfortunately, I've not found a dairy free milk that goes well in tea. If you have one, then let me know. There's like websites you can look at to see which milk substitutes have added supplemented calcium and vitamin D, and which ones don't contain sugar when you're giving it to your baby. But it's not as important, obviously, when you're an adult. James liked the coconut yogurts the best. There's a brand called Suckies that did like little dairy-free pouches of yogurt if you want something to take like out and about, which he quite liked. We tried the soya yogurts, and I just thought they tasted awful. James didn't like it, to be honest. And of course, some babies who are react to dairy react to soy as well. Butter wise, the Flora plant based butter and Lurpak plant based butter are definitely the best I've tried. I would say they're actually really good. If I didn't think about it too much, I could definitely just believe it was regular butter, even when I've just eaten it like plain on some toast or some bread. Most supermarkets now, even smallish ones like the Co-op, have a really good free from range with dairy free cakes, chocolate. The one I'd recommend best is the Galaxy caramel dairy free, is really pretty good. It's my personal favourite. Ben and Jerry's do a dairy free ice cream, which is pretty decent. Oh, and the Tesco free from frozen profiteroles are honestly delicious, and I eat them now by choice. They are that good. There's a website that's called Accidentally Vegan, and that lists foods which are vegan, and so they're all dairy free. And that includes some things on there like Biscoff spread is dairy free. Oreo cookies are as well. So it's worth checking out because there might be some things that you eat anyway that actually happen to be dairy free. So cooking at home was actually pretty easy. It was a lot harder to eat out, both as an adult when I was avoiding dairy and also when James could eat out with us at a restaurant or cafe. He ended up quite often just eating plain chips if there was nothing else he could have. And I hadn't brought something from home, which isn't ideal, but it's not exactly going to do any lasting damage. I learned to sort of plan ahead for these situations because it was annoying when, say, you were going on holiday and you're at the airport and then on a plane and there was nothing for them to easily eat. But again, most of the calories at that point were still coming from breastfeeding, and I would just make sure to have lots of snacks on hand. The other good option I found was that most supermarkets will sell some baby pouches that are dairy free. Deliciously Ella ones, I think it's called, that are dairy free and made with coconut milk. So I did buy a load of those and have on hand, but unfortunately James only ever really liked the ones that were just plain fruit. So we ended up not really using them, but I know plenty of other people whose babies absolutely love them. And finally, the last thing I was going to mention was the milk ladder. So this basically involves giving your child an increasing amount of slightly less and less cooked milk, if that makes sense. So baked milk, like in biscuits, is less likely to cause a reaction than having it just whole milk straight out the fridge. So you get given the guide and you get given the recipes, or it gives some options of things you can buy in the shops. So you can choose if you want. But you can either make your own biscuits or you can have some like malted milk biscuits. And you start with, I think, a quarter, and then you work your way up to having one or two biscuits a day. And then once you've got, hopefully by the end of the week, eating that full biscuit, you can, with no issues, you can then move on to the next stage. Um, there's like quite a lot of different variations, I think, depending on which country you're in or which part of the UK you're in. We did the IMAP milk platter. And so, yeah, with the IMAP one, you start with biscuits, then muffins, pancakes, cheese, yogurt, and then milk, if I remember correctly. When I did some research before we started this, it did say that this was only for those with non-IgE allergies. But when I asked the dietitian, she said it was okay to start the first week, and if there's any problems, to stop and contact them. But yeah, James actually sailed through it. There was one week, I think it was the muffin week, where I could just not get him to try it at all. He just would not even put it in his mouth. I don't know why. So I think I just gave him more of the biscuits for a few days, and then we just moved on to the next step. And I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do, but that's what we did, and it was fine. Also, as a side note, the pancake recipe they give you is delicious. That's the recipe I use to this day to make like American style pancakes. They're really good. So yeah, that was our journey with milk allergy and my 3-year-old. He now guzzles cow's milk and he can eat whatever he wants, and it all ended very happily. But it was this whole experience with that made me start. I had a very low threshold for being worried about cow's milk protein allergy because she was with Alba when she was getting fussy and farty and the eczema. That's what made me wonder if it was the cow's milk and the breast milk. 'Cause obviously, she's not weaning yet. So, and I just didn't want to mess around. And if your baby or your child or you yourself have eczema, then you know that it's just a miserable condition. Being itchy and uncomfortable just impacts your whole life, your sleep, everything. So I just decided to just immediately go dairy free for 4 weeks. And it was very easy this time around to cut it out. I knew what to avoid and the hidden things that contain milk, which you might not think of, like naan bread, for example, is made with yogurt. Um, and I knew which were all dairy alternatives that I liked, so I could just get them in quickly. But it was still annoying, especially when you're running on no sleep. The smallest thing, like not being able to eat the pizza that everyone else is having, feels like a really big deal. Um, and her skin did get a lot better, which initially worried me. But we were also completely on it 100% with putting on her creams twice a day and all the rest. And so after it had been 5 weeks, I started to eat dairy again. So just at the start of this week. And we've kept a close eye on it, and her skin hasn't gotten any worse. So I'm pretty confident now that this wasn't CMPA with her. Obviously, I'm going to keep an eye out on her skin, but yeah, it means I can get back to having cheese boards and all the good things that I like, all the stuff that's not that good for you. But, and so, yeah, and that's the recommendations for non-IgE allergies. So my son got a blood test because he had that immediate reaction with the hives and the sneezing, which is the markers of an IgE reaction. And for non-IgE, the symptoms are sort of less acute, more chronic things like being gassy or having a sore tummy or mucus, sometimes blood in nappies and in the poo, eczema, baby being really unsettled. If there's those sort of non-IgE symptoms, then the recommendation, if you're breastfeeding, is to completely eliminate dairy from your diet for 4 to 6 weeks and then reintroduce and look to see that the symptoms had improved and then came back once you introduced dairy again. But of course, it can be really difficult because all those symptoms, apart from blood in the poo, which always needs a review by a doctor, that can just be normal baby behavior of being a bit fussy and a bit gassy. So yeah, it's definitely a bit confusing. And to be honest, I think it's probably confusing for health professionals because, like I mentioned a bit earlier, I'm in this cow's milk protein allergy Facebook group, and I think I think GPs and doctors, it seems like everyone gets managed slightly differently. Yeah, is their experience, and I think a lot of people from hearing their stories feel they struggle to make sense of a system where people seem to be getting different tests done or being managed in different ways and or maybe not feel like they're not being listened to, even though they feel like their baby's got a problem because again, like I said, how do you tell what's normal baby behavior between having or CMPA? So yeah. Anyway, I thought I would share my two experiences in case it was helpful for anyone out there. I'm in no way an expert on this, but if anyone has any questions, then feel free to comment or send me a private message and I'll try to answer it or point you to some of the resources that I've used in the past. And if anyone wants to share their experience or has any other recommendations for dairy free foods, then let me know. And thank you so much for listening, and I will see you again soon.